Earlier in the year, I had this gentleman who asked to speak before City Council, who's a direct descendant of Mr. Pablo Melendrez, who's been determined to be one of the founders of Las Cruces. And Mr. Melendrez, Carlos here, has a very compelling story and some information to show that, that he is in fact, Pablo Melendrez had something to do with the founding of Las Cruces, and has very many people interested in this story and would like to share what information he has with us today. Mr. Melendrez.
I wish to thank Mayor Miyagashima for the opportunity to address the council. As he just said, my name is Carlos Melendrez. I am a great-great-grandson of Pablo Melendrez, the founder of Las Cruces, and I'm here to propose opportunities regarding Founders Day. I know that to some, it is ambiguous as to who is the founder of Las Cruces, and very few are aware of aspects of our rich history that need discussion and appreciation. To that end, I have prepared a narrative. Unfortunately, we won't be able to have it overhead, some kind of complications, but I have put together 15 copies at least for the council, should they care for some follow-up on that. I will be reading from the narrative and pausing to interject commentary as appropriate. I also wish to thank the council for listening to what I hope is an enlightening, if somewhat provocative, interpretation of our local history. Provocative to some, that is, to others, a long overdue airing of our history. In that vein, I might add the opinion that we in southern New Mexico have been negligent in recognizing and celebrating our history compared to our fellow New Mexicans in the northern part of the state. I just returned last week from attending the National Latino Writers Conference held in Albuquerque. I attended the conference on a scholarship regarding my manuscript on the repatriation effort regarding Geronimo. The manuscript initially began as a manuscript on Pablo Melendrez. Because of Pablo Melendrez's interaction with Apaches, ultimately my focus shifted to the repatriation effort. While at the conference, I had the opportunity to discuss the founding family narrative, which was warmly received, as I hope it will be received by you. The narrative is approximately 10 minutes long or so, and hopefully after that you will want to discuss it, and obviously make myself available at any future time for further discussion should it warrant. Let me just begin by saying that Native people have occupied southern New Mexico and the Mesilla Valley for millennia. Spaniards arrived in the area in 1598, but they were only passing through in search of their fabled cities of gold, the 7 cities of Cibola. They established settlements in northern New Mexico years before the English arrived at Jamestown. Yet southern New Mexico remained, quote, unsettled until the Mexican government encouraged the area. The Mexican government was responding to expansionist pressures from the Republic of Texas and the expansionist desires fueled by the belief in the manifest destiny of the United States, which ultimately resulted in the Mexican-American War of 1846 and 1848. Pablo Melendrez arrived from Mexico in 1843, along with 32 other colonists to settle a land grant, a Mexican land grant known as the Doñana Bend Colony Grant. Quote, Pablo Melendrez didn't plan on becoming the patron, that's captain, of the 33 colonists, but he soon emerged as the community's leader. This was the first settlement in the Mesilla Valley and the first permanently inhabited place between Socorro and El Paso del Norte. At the beginning of the second year, the settlers petitioned the prefect, that's the civil executive, of El Paso del Norte for the promised land distribution to all the individual members. A count of settlers to whom the distribution was to be made revealed that the colony had grown to over 200 people. The prefect laid out individual farm tracts as well as residential lots. Non-allocated land was reserved for future settlers. His final action before returning to El Paso del Norte was to appoint Pablo Melendrez as alcalde, mayor, on January 25, 1844. The prefect authorized Melendrez to issue to the colonists papers representing evidence of title to their new properties. Melendrez became the prefect of Doñana. He continued to allot parcels of land to all colonists arriving before the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. As subsequent settlers joined the colony, they were allotted plots in the southern half of the grant, which became the villages of Las Cruces and Tortugas. In 1849, Alcalde Melendrez requested a survey of the Las Cruces town site, which was done by Lieutenant Delos Bennett Sackett of the United States Army. And I understand that some persons believe and wish to recognize Lieutenant Sackett as the founder of Las Cruces, but hopefully we can straighten some of this out. Pablo was soon persuaded by his admiring friends and neighbors to run for the chief office in the newly established county government. Don Pablo became the second probate judge of Doñana County in 1855. Now, the territorial organic law of 1850, given to New Mexico by Congress, called the prefect system, was part of the judicial arm of the territorial government. He, the prefect, held enough delegated or assumed authority to function in a combined legislative, executive, and judicial manner. He was the highest ranking official and wielded tremendous power, answerable only to the governor. Doñana County at the time, and I'm sorry that you can't see this overhead, but Doñana County at the time stretched from the West Texas border to California, a distance of over 800 miles. Pablo Melendrez was tasked with keeping the peace over complex competing interests during one of the most turbulent times in the history of the violent Southwest. Indian agent Michael Steck hand-delivered a letter of introduction from Governor Lane authorizing Steck to work with Prefect Melendrez on matters of Indian welfare. Enforcing matters of fairness while continuing to distribute land that was on traditional Apache territory was taxing and only exacerbated the difficulties of keeping the peace. Pablo's influence throughout southern New Mexico's early history is unparalleled. His final public service was in 1860 as Doñana Justice of the Peace. He passed away in Doñana on July 7, 1868. And Pablo's strong sense of justice and civic duty was evidently passed on to his son, Pablo Melendrez Jr. Don Pablo also gave in effect his son to Doñana County. Pablo Melendrez Jr. was born in Mexico in 1836, but he joined the family 2 years after the family's founding, which must have been about 1845. During his earliest years, he worked on the family farm. Junior Melendrez devoted his spare time to public affairs, to public and civic affairs. He first served in 1866 as Justice of the Peace for Doñana. In 1867, when Pablo Jr. was only 31, the electorate sent him to the Territorial House of Representatives for one term. In 1869, he was chosen to fill Daniel Fritz's incomplete term as probate judge. He later served 2 more terms in the same capacity. The reason he did not serve longer may have been because he raised taxes 3 times. I think you might be familiar with that. In 1871, due to ever-increasing threats of land usurpation by squatters, land speculators, and unscrupulous attorneys. Longtime residents of the area held a series of meetings to discuss how to protect themselves and their land from a menace greater than the Indian raids. Quote, this is one interpretation on one of the books that I'm referring to. Quote, procedures for a meeting on 12th of February 1871 to take into consideration necessary means to obtain confirmation corresponding to the land grants issued by the Mexican government to the colonizers of the Mesilla Valley. The Honorable Pablo Melendrez, probate judge, was elected president of the board. Messrs. John Limon and Daniel Fritz as vice presidents. The committee was to invite Dr. Spencer, the Surveyor General for the territory, to assist the present committee. Another interpretation of the same meeting by Mary Taylor. On Sunday, April 13th, the same sort of meeting was held in La Mesilla. Locust blooms were fragrant in the night winds, but during the day, and especially this one, stronger winds coated them with fine dust. Citizens met in the courthouse at the corner of Parian and Guadalupe streets to consider to counteract the same type of land grabbing which had gone on at the refugio. The Honorable Pablo Melendrez, juez de pruebas, probate judge of Doña County, was elected president of the assembled landholders. John Limon and Daniel Fritz were elected vice presidents. A commission to study the situation was named. J.D. Ball, N.V. Bennett, Cristobal Ascarte, Thomas Bull, Ignacio Horacia. After the Surveyor General of the territory failed to come, after several days, the commission levied a tax for expenses in proportion to the land and solares each settler possessed in order to complete the task themselves. It began to appear hopeful that the Mesilleros and the entire area could retain land granted to them and triumph over the claim jumpers. This was the perfect setting for the emergence of what became known as the Santa Fe Ring. If some of you are not familiar with the Santa Fe Ring, let me just read a couple of sentences here. This is, if you Google it, this is what you'll read. The Santa Fe Ring was a group of powerful attorneys and land speculators. It amassed a fortune through political corruption and fraudulent land deals. Many prominent people, primarily Republicans in New Mexico Territory, were implicated. The ring figured prominently in the Lincoln and the Colfax County Wars. Another description of the Santa Fe Ring, and this is from Mary Taylor's book. The ring was a network of lawyers, politicians, and businessmen involved for mutual gain in acquiring and selling land granted to Hispanics under Spanish and Mexican law. They also dealt in ranching, mining, and railroad interests. And that's from a place as wild as the West, or as the West ever was. Attorney Thomas B. Catron, who eventually became a U.S. Senator and reputed the largest landowner in American history, and his partner, Stephen B. Elkins, Attorney General of the Territory of New Mexico, were both considered the principals of the Santa Fe Ring, and both were, quote, involved in the fight over lands in the Mesilla Valley. Pablo Jr. became one of the chief protagonists of the spectacular and yet unprecedented Mesilla shootout, whose lessons and significance has yet to be understood, appreciated, even acknowledged, much less lauded. During 1877, Pablo Jr. served as county assessor. In 1878 and 79, he was elected probate judge under the new commission form of government. In addition, Pablo Jr. in 1876 was president of the school commission. Another of his civic positions was as a commissioned officer in Colonel Albert Fountain's command of the New Mexico Volunteer Militia. During their residence in their adopted homeland, the Melendrez family was without equal in serving their community as honest and moral political community leaders. By example, the family did indeed set a high bar for civic involvement. And about the only references I find popularly cited when referring to our founder or the colonizers of the area is that they were destitute and nearly naked when the prefect of El Paso visited, or that the Las Cruces town site was established by use of a rope. Nothing of substance is referenced, and that's a disservice to our ancestors and to the children who need to know about the contributions made by our founders. I am proposing that this council consider making a film documentary, not only of the founder, but of the spectacular fight that happened in Mesilla. You have to understand that during those times, Las Cruces was just a simple little village. Mesilla was actually the largest in the area. That was where the commerce was. That's where a lot of people were attracted, and it was full of lawyers. I wish to end an appeal as to the scope and scale of the documentary that I am proposing for you to consider. I know that the city of Las Cruces has made some documentaries in the past, and they've been very, very well received. But I don't want you to set your sights just strictly at that level. I believe that this history deserves a documentary to the scope that it would be featured on the history channels. This is what I'm asking for you to consider. I want you to do justice to our forefathers. I want you to do justice to the founder. I want you to do justice to the many citizens who lost their lands in fraudulent land deals. And most of all, I ask that you do justice to our children who need to look with pride on their own history. And that's not been forthcoming. There are many, many other little tidbits that I can mention. Pablo Melendrez Jr. is considered the founder of the Democratic Party, or one of the founders of the Democratic Party in Doñana. There's incidents of Pablo Sr. who found a stray cow and tried to figure out who it belonged to. Just another little example of the honesty of some of our founders, but we neglect and have no idea who these people were. And I think it's time that we rectified that. And I'm addressing you and hoping that you will at least consider doing a documentary. That fight is so spectacular. There's nothing in the history of the Southwest. There were over 1,000 people that were there for that gathering. If you put it in perspective to today, you'd have 20 to 30,000 people outside. And to see 10 people killed and between, and this is a minimum, 40 to 50 that were seriously injured, you've got a fight on your hands. And the reason for the fight is a fight over lands. And I hope you recognize our history and do us justice. Thank you. I will pass out the copies of the presentation, and again, if anyone would be willing or wishes to contact me at some future date, I would be happy to meet you.
Carlos, if you just want to leave them with the clerk, and she'll take care of that. Thank you for your presentation. One of the things I mentioned to you was your willingness to present the information you have, but also that in order for the city to consider that, we needed to have, and perhaps you have it in here, but we needed to have some actual proof of the things that you were discussing, and whether or not you can show some of the people that you've, and that's fine, wherever you've documented from.
Nope.
That's something there that we would be at least willing to allow management to take a look at, and perhaps then pass it through to our public information office and see if that's something there that Adrian, who you're referring to, has done several documentaries.
Yes.
And you're right, he's won probably the highest awards that a governmental channel can win.
Yeah.
And but obviously this is new and interesting information because it puts a whole new twist on this. In fact, I see one of the Sun News reporters who's interested in probably doing documentaries like that, and that's Chris Schertz in the back there. So
well,
I don't know, he may be wanting to talk to you after this, and then you could show him the information you have.
I thank you, Mayor, and Daniel Aranda also came here. He's one of the local historians in the area who's very knowledgeable, and he is at present also working on an expanded article to show the history and the documentation required and expand even on what I have said. And I might just add that, and let me quote from the former state historian, because I sent Robert J. Torres, the former state historian, a copy of the narrative. And while he had some criticisms here and there, I will quote him to where he says, "Generally, you do a good job of crediting Melendrez Sr. and Jr. with their role in the development of the growth of the Mesilla Valley. If what you want to do is memorialize Melendrez, this is a good start. However, the other settlers and land grants that constituted the valley disappear after a brief mention at the beginning. It would seem that the scope needs to be expanded to include others who also contributed. The Melendrezes were a significant part of what you are trying to emphasize here, but keep in mind they were not alone." Thank you again.
Thank you, Carlos. And also for members of the council, when you turn the page, what was really interesting, I think it's the second to last page, was the size of what Doña Ana County was at one time, which was literally probably about the size of the current congressional district right now, well, probably even larger. It was half the last fourth of New Mexico, as well as the last quarter of Arizona. That's
all the way
huge,
to the edge of San Diego from West Texas.
Could you imagine being a county commissioner and representing one of 5 districts in that?
So that you can just transport yourself and understand what the situation was at that time. And I would really welcome an opportunity to address the council, to meet privately, and also should you have and require more documentation, as I mentioned, we'd be very happy to supply that, and the local historian, Daniel Aranda, as I mentioned, is working on an expanded version of what I have presented here today. And I thank you all very much.
Well, Carlos, if you can hold on for just a second,
of
maybe
course.
a couple questions or comments from council. Yes, Councilor Small and then Councilor Silva.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Melendrez. And I've had the chance to speak with Mr. Melendrez. I think he's done a great deal of work, and I think your basic premise that there's not enough known and discussed and celebrated about history down in southern New Mexico is a very strong one. And I know the town of Mesilla has entertained discussions about learning more and finding ways to celebrate Founders Day. And I think it's wise for us to move forward on this and to certainly to enlarge and see other parts of the community to have those contributions. Mr. Melendrez, to use your work and your passion for this issue and be part of the team that explores this more fully. Thank you.
In response to those comments, I might add that my thoughts were, when we celebrate Founders Day here, that a significant part of that is the founding family, and Pablo Melendrez Jr. in his leading the party and being involved in that fight in Mesilla is something that we could possibly celebrate Founders Day around that time. And if we did a documentary to where we might even show the film in Mesilla during the particular weekend where we celebrate Founders Day. And if things evolve to where there's even been discussions of a possible recreation of the shootout, but that's a much more complex issue. But that again will also attract people here. And I have other ideas and suggestions as to how we might be able to bring in the tourists to help us celebrate our history, our very rich, unknown history.
Thank you, Mr. Melendrez. Councilor Small, I agree with you that I would like to see it move forward also, but I think it's imperative that Mr. Melendrez bring actual documentary that can be annotated as to where this information came from, so that when staff looks at it or PIO looks at it, they'll be able to put the pieces together and know if this is something here that they'd like to do. So, Councilor Silva and Councilor Connor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Melendrez, I too appreciate all the documentation that you have done and the recognition. I've always was fascinated. I have a map, an actual map that I had a replica made from the NMSU that does show that section all the way from San Diego to Las Cruces that a friend gave me as a gift, and I was always fascinated that Doña Ana County extended that long. And to know that Pablo Melendrez was the alcalde or was in charge of it it's quite, as the mayor said, try to imagine running a district of that proportion or that size. I also support, hopefully, that we could get a documentary or something. I'm trying to get the record straight here. A recommendation I might make is maybe we can collaborate with either the community college. I think the community college does a great job of putting out projects over there, so maybe we could do something of that nature. Or in-house, we have they did the documentary on the Virgen de Guadalupe and Tortugas and won great awards. So I think it would be to benefit to do something like this, because it also would recognize not only our history, but it could be an economic driver, because there are many times you go to a city because of the history and you want to know about the history of that community. So it could benefit us in many ways.
If I might also add a rejoinder to those comments, I have discussed this concept for some time, and people have felt it strong enough that because I applaud the idea of local students being involved. These are probably some of the descendants, and I applaud that kind of effort. But also, again, I caution and at least trying to keep you looking as high as possible as to what can be done with this opportunity here. And I think we could attract some of the finest documentarians that have been involved in Mexican-American issues that have ties to Walt Disney, to a number of the history channels, so that as discussions proceed, hopefully we can invite some of these people to make a presentation for us to see what it would take to make a documentary of that magnitude.
Good, good. And as you know, Mr. Mayor, it was, I think, was said earlier, everyone knows about the OK Corral. You know, that's the big famous one, and it was only a couple, 6 or 7 people that shot at. You know, I've been to Tombstone many times, and I've seen that small corral. You know, it's not really much, but when you look at this fight here that happened in Mesilla and what occurred, I mean, it's very little. You know, not very many people know about it.
We can get Mesilla to help pay for this, so that would be good too. Councilor Connor, Mayor Pro Tem Thomas.
Thank you. And Mr. Melendrez, thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for being here today, and your passion that I feel just from what you've presented today. The founding members of our community and those that you have outlined here in the Melendrez family have been, because I had a long discussion last night with my father about this. And my father's 83 years old, and but my grandparents were from this area, and so he has some recollection. I should sit the two of you down together.
I would
you may
love
know
that
him.
opportunity.
You may already know him. His name is Arturo Lucero, and so. But what I would like to do is ask Mr. Garza, what is your direction here and what is your recommendation?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Connor, I think there's several things that need to be done. This is the first I've had any interaction with Mr. Melendrez or any discussion about this, so I would need to assess with staff the details of what is being proposed, kind of the scope, the size, the magnitude. I'm hearing a large level of support from council, so certainly something we can do up to a certain level, similar to some of the other documentaries that we've been able to do without much delay. If it becomes something that we want to go above and beyond that, certainly there's budgetary issues that I'd have concerns over, but certainly it's something that we would be able to move forward with. I think a next step would be simply sitting down with Mr. Melendrez and him bringing to the table some of that documents that he talked about having and our public information office so we can kind of put together a game plan.
Thank you, and that's what I think we want to look forward to is just the game plan and how we can incorporate what you've put together with our PIO or our video team, because they do some marvelous work, and then where we would step up from there. But thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Councilor Connor. Mayor Pro Tem Thomas?
Thank you, Mr. Melendez. That was very, very interesting, and I'd like to learn more. I want to make one suggestion to Mr. Garza and staff is that we get the museum people involved. We have a standing exhibit in the Brannigan Center that's the history of Las Cruces. And so if we're going to think about incorporating the Melendez information, then we definitely have to look, I mean, that's going to have a big impact on what's currently on display in terms of the exhibit in the Brannigan Center, Cultural Center. So I think that the museum staff also need to be involved in that, and that might be a place to begin, would be to start with redoing that exhibit as a lead-in to doing something later, possibly with the documentary and so on. But we wouldn't want to put out a documentary that was totally different from what we have in the ongoing standing exhibit, so I think they have to be involved and be part of the discussion, and we have to look at changes there as well.
I thank you for those recommendations, and I welcome any opportunity. As I said, most of this history is neglected, and I would welcome it to be absorbed into the museums, into the fabric of the city of Las Cruces, so that this narrative becomes known through our citizens. It's something that's needed.
And you might want to talk to the people at, I think it's HSR, Human Systems Resources. They collect, they're more interested in the history a little north of here and, you know, what went on up around in that area, but they have a huge collection of oral histories from, you know, elderly people in the community, and there might be some information there that would be useful, you know, as well. So I take a look at that, and then, you know, there are a couple other people in the community, I have to get their names, but, you know, who work in this area, so I could see, quite a big collaboration here with a lot of people have documents and information, so we ought to bring it all together. So thank you for bringing your part.
Thank you all.
Councilor Sork? Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Melendez, this is very interesting. I really like this stuff myself. But I was wondering, have you asked the Community College or NMSU, the Creative Media Institute, about this at all? Have you contacted them or discussed with them?
I initially contacted the Media Institute. The response was as follows. They felt that there were entire cities, and they have mentioned some in Texas, that have been able to build their celebration of their own founders and their own history to where it took on a personality of their history, and they felt that this was something that they wanted to participate in. Politics interfered a couple of years ago, and I felt that, again, let me try and address the city of Las Cruces, and then we can add on. But there's no question that there's interest and people wanting to do this. And obviously, with the change in administrations here, I know that the funding is not as easy to come by on films, but if we put our head together, I think we can find enough substance and monies to be able to do what we have in mind.
Okay, thank you. I would like to ask our staff to do what they can to collaborate with the college and university on this matter.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Any members of the public have any comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to item number 3. So, Mr. Melendrez, again, oh, you do? Frida? Oh, please come forward.
Mayor, council, councilwoman, women, I would publicly like to thank Pablo
Excuse me,
Melendrez.
Frida, I need you to state your name, please.
Frida Flores. I'm a resident of Las Cruces and also his neighbor, and I know the family, the Melendrez family. And I want to publicly thank him for all his work that he's done, and I also want to thank him for recognizing the fact that the Indian people were here first. He did not forget that. And thank you again.
Can you read my book on Geronimo?
Well, I would love to have a copy. Thank you.
Thanks, Frida. Mr. Melendrez, again, if you could get that information, the information where you still can collaborate with what you were presented in this handout you gave us, and when you get that, if you can either contact either myself or the city manager's office, and then they'll go from there and get it to PIO and see how we can, Public Information Office, and see.
I'll be happy to supply you with whatever you need, Mayor. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.